All right. So the UK, a little bit of good news here. The UK says it's suspending some arms exports to Israel. Not nearly enough, but it's progress. UK's Prime Minister Keir Starmer's government said Monday that it's suspending exports of some weapons to Israel because they could be used to break international law, a move with limited military impact intended to increase pressure by Israel's frustrated allies for an end to the war in Gaza. Foreign Secretary David Lammy said the UK government had concluded there is a clear risk some items could be used to, quote, commit or facilitate a serious violation of international humanitarian law. Oh, you think so? You think so? He told lawmakers the decision related to about 30 of 350 existing export licenses for equipment that we assess is for use in the current conflict in Gaza, including parts for military planes, helicopters, and drones, along with items used for ground targeting. The decision wasn't a determination of innocence or guilt about whether Israel had broken international law and wasn't an arms embargo, he said. Israeli Defense Minister Yoav Gallant said on X, quote, deeply disheartened to learn of the sanctions placed by the UK government on export licenses to Israel's defense establishment. The United Kingdom is among a number of Israel's longstanding allies whose governments are under growing pressure to halt weapons exports because of the toll of the nearly 11-month-old conflict in Gaza. More than 40,000 Palestinians have been killed, according to the health ministry in the Hamas-run territory, which doesn't distinguish between militants and civilians. And it's all okay. Get all those caveats in there. Make sure, AP. British firms sell a relatively small amount of weapons and components to Israel compared to major suppliers such as the US and Germany. Earlier this year, the government said military exports to Israel amounted to 42 million pounds, which is $53 million in 2022. But the UK is one of Israel's closest allies, so the decision carries some symbolic significance. The military affairs correspondent for Israel's Channel 13 TV said that the move could become more serious if other allies follow suit. You hear that, folks? No matter where you are, do what you can to pressure your government to cut ties with Israel. It is having an impact. Sam Perlow Freeman, research coordinator for the group Campaign Against Arms Trade, said that the announcement was, quote, a belated but welcome move. But he said that it was outrageous and unjustifiable that parts for F-35 fighter jets weren't among the exports being suspended. The government move comes after two groups, Palestinian human rights organization Al-Haq and the UK-based Global Legal Action Network, filed a legal challenge aimed at forcing the UK to stop granting any licenses for arms exports to Israel. The case has yet to go to a full court hearing. Deirbla Minogue, senior lawyer for the Global Legal Action Network, said the government's momentous decision vindicates everything Palestinians have been saying for months. I would call this more covering your ass in case of future Nuremberg trials. The UK's center-left Labour government under Starmer, elected in July, has faced pressure from some of its own members and lawmakers to apply more pressure on Israel to stop the violence. In the election, the party lost several seats it had been expected to win to pro-Palestinian independence after Starmer initially refused to call for a ceasefire following Israel's retaliation after October 7th. In a departure from the stance of its conservative predecessor, Starmer's government said in July that the UK will not intervene in the International Criminal Court's request for an arrest warrant against Israeli Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu. Starmer also restored funding for UN Palestinian Relief Agency UNRWA, which had been suspended by conservative Prime Minister Rishi Sunak's government in January. Lamy, who has visited Israel twice in the past 2 months as part of Western efforts to push for a ceasefire, said that he was a Zionist and friend of Israel, but called the violence in Gaza horrifying. Quote, Israel's actions in Gaza continue to lead to immense loss of civilian life, widespread destruction to civilian infrastructure, and immense suffering, he said. By the way, widespread intentional destruction to civilian infrastructure, and I don't think you can argue that's not what's happening in Gaza, even if you're a Zionist. That's a war crime. That is a war crime.
That is outlined in the Genocide Convention, to make a place unlivable for a group. That is what that is. That's what that is.
So now this is a very typical liberal measure, to be slightly better than the other guys, but not really do what's required, which would be a complete arms embargo against Israel. And to hedge on, we're not saying they're committing war crimes. We're just saying in case, maybe at some point, it's possible. Some very smart people are saying.
Some very smart people are saying, yeah. Well, this is the importance of people saying it, right? And, you look at it on the one hand as being insufficient, but then, you also look at the significance of bodies like the ICJ and the ICC. This is why we say, like, look, we're not going to lie to you and tell you that justice is going to be done quickly. It's not going to be done quickly. But it will be done, and it will be done because of things like this, right? I mean, anything that gives countries pause, this will be a slow bleed, but it's important to have these decisions on the books so that, even horrible countries like the UK and the US, their hands can be forced in certain areas. And you could lament that this is not what it should be. But that this is the path to justice. Unfortunately, it is going to be slower than we would like it to be. But this is the way it will come about. There's, as I've said, there's two timelines here. There's the liberation for Palestine timeline, and then there's the justice for Palestine timeline. And this goes on that second timeline. As for the first timeline, is there time left on that timeline? My prediction now a year ago was that there wasn't. And when you look at Gaza, how can you even rebuild that? There's no rebuilding that. There's no rebuilding that.
It'll take decades.
Yeah. It'll take decades.
You're basically, you're not basically, you're literally going to have to start from the ground.
Yes.
There's nothing left.
Yes, indeed.
Please clap.